My mom said, "Your sister needs space," while stripping my room bare. Once she left, my $100,000 in savings had disappeared. I didn't react. I sold the house in silence and walked away. What came next morning wrecked them completely. My mom has lived by two rules for as long as I can remember, and she's never broken them in my 26 years of being alive. Never leave food sitting out and never, ever leave the garage door open. She always said it invites trouble, and bugs too. So when I rolled into the driveway after 5 exhausting days in Detroit dealing with contract negotiations and saw the garage door standing wide open, my stomach dropped because I knew right away something wasn't right. I grabbed my bag and went inside, and the first thing that hit me was the sharp smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with fresh paint, the kind that lingers in your nose. My bedroom door was wide open, which already felt wrong because I'd kept that door locked my whole life, even when I was a kid. I stepped inside, froze, and honestly forgot how to breathe for a second because the room was completely empty. My bed was gone, my desk was gone, and my computer setup, the one I'd spent 3 years building piece by piece and poured $4,200 into, was gone too. My bookshelf, my clothes, my nightstand, even the framed photo of Grandpa Harold and me at the lake that he gave me just 3 days before he passed, every single thing was missing. All that was left were bare walls and dents in the carpet showing where my furniture used to sit. I stood there staring, my brain flat out refusing to make sense of what I was seeing, and then I heard voices behind me. I heard my mom say something about sage green being calming and spa-like. I turned around and saw her in the hallway with my sister, Ashley, both of them holding paint swatches like they were decorating a vacation rental instead of standing outside my gutted room. When my mom saw me, she didn't flinch or apologize. She just smiled and said, "Oh good, you're back. Quick question, sage or seafoam?" I stared at her and asked where my things were, and she casually said they were in the garage and that they'd bagged everything up because garbage bags were easier than boxes. Hearing my entire life described like that made my chest tighten. Ashley stepped forward with that same look she always had, somewhere between entitled and mildly annoyed, and announced that she was moving back in, like it was good news I should be happy about. She said she and Brian were done, that she needed space to heal, and that she was taking my room because Mom's room was too small and mine had the attached bathroom, which worked better for her morning routine. I looked at my mom, waiting for an explanation or an apology or even a weak excuse about how this was temporary or how they'd meant to call me, but none of that came. Instead, she told me I could sleep in the basement on the old pull-out couch and added that it wasn't ideal, but I was 26, and it was time I started thinking about my own place anyway. The thing was, I had been thinking about my own place for 10 years. Since I was 16, I'd saved every paycheck from every job I ever had, from the grocery store to the warehouse to the IT help desk and later the consulting firm. Every dollar that didn't go to food, gas, or the rent my mom charged me went straight into savings. I had a clear goal of $100,000, enough for a solid down payment on a house of my own, and 7 months ago, I finally hit that number. I pulled the money out in 10 cashier's checks, $10,000 each, and kept them in a fireproof lockbox in my closet because after watching the banks wipe out half of Grandpa Harold's retirement in 2008, I didn't trust anyone but myself. Standing there in my empty room, I realized my closet was empty too, and I asked where my lockbox was. My mom's face shifted just a little, a tiny flicker of something I didn't like, and she asked what lockbox. I described it, the gray box with the combination lock that sat on the top shelf, and the silence that followed felt heavy. Ashley suddenly found the paint samples very interesting, and I raised my voice and asked my mom again where it was. She finally said they found it while clearing out the room and explained that Ashley needed help with her situation, that the divorce was expensive and she needed support. I asked how much they took, and when no one answered, I asked again until my mom straightened up and went into that defensive posture she used whenever she was about to justify something she shouldn't. She listed it off like a bill, saying Ashley needed a deposit on a new apartment, first month, last month, security, plus a divorce lawyer retainer, furniture, a car payment catch-up, and some credit card debt. I asked how much again, and Ashley quietly said all of it, that they needed all of it. Hearing that $100,000, 10 years of work, was just gone made my head ring, and my mom had the nerve to tell me I'd earn it back because I was young and had time, while Ashley was in crisis and had lost her marriage and her home. I pointed out that she cheated on Brian, and Ashley snapped her head up to deny it. But I told her Brian had called me 6 months earlier and told me everything, including how he caught her with his business partner in their bed in the house he paid for. My mom stepped between us and said that was enough and that whatever happened in Ashley's marriage was private, and I shot back asking if my $100,000 was private too. She said it was family money and that family share, and hearing that made something in me go cold. Ashley was 2 years older than me and hadn't called me in 2 years unless she needed cash. 500 here, 300 there, 200 once for some pyramid scheme she swore was legit, and I never saw a dime of it again, and now this. I should have yelled or called the cops or demanded answers, but instead I got quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people uneasy, and I said okay. My mom blinked and asked what, and I repeated that I understood, that I'd get my things from the garage and figure out the basement later. I walked past them and into the garage, where 12 black garbage bags sat piled in the corner like it was trash day, my entire existence sealed in plastic. I didn't open them, not yet, because instead I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in 8 years. Mr. Collins, my grandfather's lawyer who handled his estate when I was 18. He was the same man who'd read the will out loud and made it clear that Grandpa Harold left the house to me. Not my mom Linda and not Ashley, but me. I remembered my mom crying and saying there had to be a mistake, then getting quiet and strategic, telling me I was only 18 and that she'd handle things until I was ready. We never transferred anything, and she never brought it up again. But 3 years ago I started paying the property taxes directly and noticed something important on the bill under owner, Tom Miller. I'd already called Mr. Collins once before and asked him straight out if there had been some kind of mistake, and he told me there was no mistake at all, that the deed had been transferred to me the day my grandfather Harold passed, and that my mother never had any legal claim to the house, which meant she'd basically been living there as my tenant for the past 5 years. I kept that to myself back then because I didn't want a fight or a bunch of family drama. But standing there in the garage surrounded by black plastic bags, something else came back to me clear as day. The last time I saw Grandpa Harold 3 days before his stroke, when we were sitting on the back porch, and he looked at me with those sharp blue eyes and told me the house was mine and that he'd made sure of it, warning me that my mom and Ashley were takers who wouldn't stop until there was nothing left, and making me promise I wouldn't let that happen, a promise I hadn't fully understood until now. Mr. Collins picked up on the second ring, and I told him it was Tom Miller, Harold Miller's grandson, and after a quick greeting I asked him to confirm that the house on Maple Street was still in my name. And he said of course it was, that nothing had changed since we last spoke, even citing the address and date of transfer and asking if I'd been paying the taxes, which I had every year. When I asked what it would take to sell the property, he explained it was straightforward, that as the sole owner I had full authority and wouldn't need anyone else's signature even though someone else was living there, adding that legally my mother was an unauthorized occupant and always had been. I leaned against the garage wall and let that sink in, realizing the house was mine and mine alone, not family property, not my mom's safety net, but my house, and the person who'd just stolen $100,000 from me had been living there as a guest. I asked one more question about selling to a cash buyer and how fast it could close, and he said 3 weeks or less, wished me well, and warned me to be careful, and for the first time in my life I truly was. After hanging up, I stood there thinking about the money that was gone, my room stripped bare, my life stuffed into trash bags, and the fact that they had no idea whose house they were standing in. And while I could have gone inside and dropped that truth on them right then, I knew better because this wasn't about emotion. It was about patience and precision, just like Grandpa Harold had planned when he protected me by putting that house in my name. I pulled out my phone, searched for cash homebuyers nearby, emailed 3 of them with a short subject line about a quick, discreet sale, and then went back inside where my mom Linda and Ashley were cooking dinner like nothing had happened, telling me to wash up and stop being dramatic when I said I wasn't hungry and was heading to bed. I spent that night in the dark basement on a busted pull-out couch, not sleeping but doing the math, figuring the house was worth around $340,000, which even after subtracting the stolen money would leave me with $240,000, more than double what I'd had that morning, while they'd be left with nothing. By 7:14 the next morning my phone buzzed with a cash buyer asking for a walkthrough, followed by a response from a realtor named Diana, and while I listened to my mom and Ashley upstairs acting like they'd won, I typed back that we could talk right now. Diana took one look at the photos and told me it was going to get messy, and I told her they'd made it messy first. So she nodded and met me at a coffee shop where I laid out my conditions for a fast, private, cash sale with no signs or open houses. And after confirming I was the sole owner and that the current occupants had no legal claim, she warned me that cash buyers usually wanted vacant possession, which was fine because the occupants would be notified after closing and given 30 days to leave. She left with fresh photos I'd taken while my mom was out, and that night I started quietly moving my things a few bags at a time after midnight, loading clothes, books, computer parts, and even Grandpa Harold's watch from a hidden lockbox into my car, freezing once when Ashley's bedroom light flicked on, but realizing she hadn't seen me. By Thursday morning, everything I owned was in a small storage unit that cost me $89 a month, and neither my mom nor Ashley noticed a thing because they were too busy planning how to renovate the room they thought they'd taken from me. Thursday night at dinner, Mom had cooked pot roast, and while I sat there chewing, Ashley was talking like she was already redecorating, saying she was thinking about turning the room into a reading nook by the window with fairy lights because it would feel very healing, and Mom smiled at her and told her it sounded lovely before turning to me and asking me to pass the butter. I handed it over and kept eating, listening to them plan how to redesign my room inside my house that I was about to sell, and I didn't smile or argue or react at all. I just ate in silence. Friday morning at exactly 9:17 a.m., Diana called and said she had complicated news, then followed it up by telling me the best offer was $344,000 in cash, with a 21-day close from a young couple relocating from Seattle. I told her that sounded like good news, and she agreed, but explained the buyers were nervous about the occupancy issue and wanted written confirmation that the house would be vacant within 30 days of closing and that I would personally handle any complications, which meant eviction if needed, because they didn't want to be the bad guys. I told her to let them know I'd handle it and that my lawyer would send the vacancy notice the day we closed, and when she asked if I was sure since this involved my family, I told her they stopped being my family the moment they stole from me. 2 hours later, the buyers accepted. Cash offer locked at $344,000 with a 21-day close, and I signed everything electronically from a park bench while Mom thought I was at work, setting the closing date for March 15th, the Ides of March, which I knew Grandpa Harold would have found fitting. The next couple of weeks felt like living inside a strange play where I kept my lines short and everyone else acted like nothing was wrong. 14 days out, Mom asked me to fix the kitchen faucet because it had been dripping and driving her crazy, and I spent 2 hours repairing it only for her to glance at the sink afterward and say finally, mentioning that Ashley had been annoyed by the noise, without a thank you in sight. 12 days out, I overheard Mom on the phone with Aunt Carol saying I was being dramatic about the money and that you'd think they took my life savings, laughing as she said I'd get over it like I always did, and I stood there in the hallway feeling something cold and solid settle in my chest. 10 days out, Ashley had a friend over and I heard her ask if I was still around, to which Ashley replied that I was just moping in the basement and that Mom said I'd adjust eventually because I'd always been the sensitive one, which was funny considering I was the one who worked 60-hour weeks, fixed their problems, covered bills, and never asked for anything. That night, I heard Mom and Ashley whispering in the kitchen, Ashley worrying about what would happen if I told someone about the money or called the police, and Mom laughing it off, saying I never made waves and that after a few weeks everything would go back to normal. And as I listened from the basement stairwell, I realized that version of normal, where I paid and they took without ever saying thanks, was finished. 8 days before closing, the title company sent the final documents showing a clean title with no liens, and I signed them from my car during lunch. 6 days out, I found a small one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood for $400 a month, signed a 6-month lease, and moved my things out of storage while Mom and Ashley were off at a spa day paid for with my stolen money. For days out, the apartment was set up with a bed, a desk, and the basics, and sitting on my new couch, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, which was the sense that things could actually get better. 2 days before closing, I packed the last of my belongings into my backpack. And when Mom asked if I was going out and whether I'd be back for dinner, I told her no and saw something flicker in her eyes when she asked if everything was okay, but I just told her everything was fine and walked out. Closing day came on March 15th, and at 10 a.m., I signed the final documents with Diana, the title rep, and the buyers on a video call, excited about their new home. And when the wife asked if the house came with any furniture, I told her no and explained the current occupants would be taking their belongings, which she accepted easily, while talking about renovations and starting fresh, a phrase that hit me because it was exactly what Ashley had wanted, just with my money and my life. The deed transferred at 10:47 a.m. The money hit my account at 11:15, and I stared at the balance, stunned by the fact that it was more than I'd ever had or expected. I made one last call to Mr. Collins, told him the sale had closed, and asked him to send the vacancy notice that day by certified mail, giving 30 days to vacate, clarifying it was a vacancy notice and not an eviction since my mother had never been a legal tenant. And when he warned it would be a hard letter to receive, I told him it wouldn't be as hard as finding out your own mother stole $100,000 from you. I asked him not to include my new address anywhere, just his office, because I didn't want her knowing where I lived, maybe not ever. And before hanging up, he told me Grandpa Harold had seen this coming and once told him that his daughter and granddaughter took while I built, which was why I got the house. I sat alone in my quiet apartment with my phone turned off until Monday afternoon, and when I finally powered it back on at 3:47 p.m. There were 47 missed calls, over 200 texts, and a dozen voicemails, starting with Mom confused and panicked about the letter saying the house was sold, then angry, then cold as she admitted she'd learned the deed had been in my name the whole time. I sent one message to the family group chat saying I sold my house, and they had 30 days to vacate, and Mom replied immediately, saying my house, and reminding me she'd lived there for 25 years. Ashley texted first, saying I couldn't do this and that she had nowhere to go. Then Mom followed with a message saying Grandpa Harold would be ashamed of me, and I replied that Grandpa left me the house because he didn't trust them, which were his words, not mine. After 30 seconds of silence, the rest of the family piled in, with Aunt Carol asking what was going on because Mom had called her crying, Uncle Steve saying this was cruel and that family doesn't do this to family, and Cousin Mike chiming in like it was a joke, asking if I really sold my mom's house. I could practically feel the story taking shape in real time, me painted as the villain who kicked his poor mother out for no reason. So I told them to ask Mom what happened to my $100,000 in savings and why my belongings were stuffed into garbage bags when I came home, and then decide who was actually being cruel. Another long stretch of silence followed until Aunt Carol asked Mom what I was talking about, and Mom said nothing while Ashley jumped in and claimed I was exaggerating and that it wasn't that much money. I told them it was exactly $100,000, 10 years of savings, and that I had bank statements for every deposit if anyone wanted proof. Silence again, until Uncle Steve finally asked Mom outright if she took my money, and when she didn't answer, I told them they had 29 days left and should start packing. Then I left the group chat, turned off my phone, and sat alone in my apartment feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was peace. On day 28, Mom hired a lawyer, and I knew because he called me and introduced himself as Robert Keller, saying he represented my mother, Linda, and that she wanted him to look into the property sale. He said she claimed she had an ownership interest based on a verbal agreement, which I told him never existed. And then he said she believed Grandpa Harold intended for her to have the house. So I asked why my name was the only one on the deed, which led to a long pause. He tried again, saying there was supposedly a misunderstanding and that she was meant to be added when I turned 25, and I reminded him I was 26 and had never seen any paperwork to support that, asking if he had, which led to another pause and then a quiet no. I told him the deed was in my name. I sold my property. Everything was legal. And when he said she wanted to contest the sale, I asked on what grounds since the title company found no liens or claims and his client had no legal standing. He said she was my mother, and I told him she was also the person who stole $100,000 from me and asked if he wanted to discuss that instead, which stopped him cold. He admitted he wasn't aware of that, and I told him of course he wasn't, because she'd only told him her mean son sold her house and left out the part about taking my money and throwing my belongings out like trash, then asked if that money part was true, and I told him I had 10 years of bank statements and that if she wanted court, I'd file theft charges and let a judge decide who wronged who. After another long pause, he said he'd speak with his client, and I told him to do that and remind her she had 22 days left. On day 25, Something unexpected happened when I was getting coffee across town and saw Ashley sitting by the window with a laptop open, scrolling through what looked like apartment listings and low-income housing options. And she looked smaller somehow, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, no makeup, nothing like the woman who took my room without blinking. She didn't see me, so I ordered my coffee and sat in the corner watching as she clicked through listing after listing, rejecting them for being too expensive, too far, or unavailable, before pulling out her phone and calling someone to ask for a few $100s for first month's rent, explaining that Jake wouldn't answer and Mom was tapped out, only to hang up and wipe her eyes when the answer was no. For just a moment, I felt something. But then I remembered she spent my $100,000 without asking, took my room without asking, and had been bleeding everyone dry for years, and I realized this wasn't karma. It was consequences, so I finished my coffee and left without her ever knowing I was there. On day 23, Mr. Collins called me and said he'd found something while reviewing Grandpa Harold's file that I should know about, explaining there was a sealed letter with instructions to give it to me if I ever sold the property. And since it was addressed to me, I drove to his office that afternoon and opened the yellowed envelope with Grandpa's handwriting that read, "For Marcus, when the time comes." Inside, Grandpa wrote that if I was reading it, something had happened and either I sold the house or was thinking about it, and that he left me the house because I was the only one in the family who understood that things had to be earned, not taken, telling me he was proud of me and that if I sold it, I shouldn't feel guilty because it was mine to do with as I saw fit, reminding me that they'd call me cruel and say family comes first while ignoring the fact that I was only family to them when they needed money, repairs, or problems solved. He ended by saying I deserved better, that he was sorry he wouldn't be there to see what I built, and signed it with love, adding a note that the watch was in the basement and not to let them find it. I sat there for a long time while Mr. Collins stayed quiet. Then he finally said Grandpa Harold had once told him my mother was his biggest disappointment not because she failed, but because she never tried, and I folded the letter, thanked him, and left knowing Grandpa had given me options for a reason. On day 20, someone knocked on my apartment door, and when I looked through the peephole and saw Mom standing there, I almost didn't open it. But then I realized she needed to see my face when I told her no, so I opened the door just a crack and saw how bad she looked. Red eyes, messy hair, worn down in a way I'd never seen before. Her clothes were wrinkled and she looked worn down, and when I asked how she found me, she admitted Uncle Steve knew someone at the DMV, which told me someone had accessed my records illegally, a federal crime. So I told her to let Uncle Steve know I was documenting everything, and that if anyone from the family showed up at my door again, without permission, I'd be filing a formal complaint. And I watched her expression shift because she hadn't expected that kind of response. She said she just wanted to talk, so I told her to talk, and she explained the new owners kept calling and wanted them out early, even offering money to leave before the 30 days were up, and I told her that was between her and them. She said they had nowhere to go, that Ashley was looking at apartments but nothing was available and she couldn't afford anything. So I asked her where the $100,000 went, and she flinched before repeating that Ashley needed it, the same excuse she always used, which made me ask when it ever stopped. She said Ashley was family, and I reminded her that so was I, asking if I was family when my things were shoved into garbage bags or when my savings were taken without permission, and when she said she was going to pay it back. I asked when, pointing out she'd never paid back anything in her life, not after Dad left when I was 12, not after Grandpa paid for everything, and not after I took over paying for her car insurance, medical bills, and half her groceries. She didn't answer, so I told her I'd given this family everything and all I got in return was my entire life bagged up and dumped like trash. And when she started crying and asked what I wanted her to do since she couldn't undo it or give the money back, I told her that was exactly why I sold the house. She asked if I was really abandoning my family, and I told her she abandoned me first, just quietly enough that I didn't see it until now. Then I closed and locked the door, listened to her cry in the hallway, and felt nothing at all. On day 15, I almost called her back, my finger hovering over the button, while Grandpa Harold's voice echoed in my head about family coming first. But then I remembered his letter saying I was only family to them when it was convenient, so I put the phone down. That night, I drove past the house, not to gloat, but just to look, and saw a moving sale sign in the yard, furniture laid out in the driveway, and Ashley's friend's pickup parked on the street, and I realized they were selling my things, the furniture and desk and bookshelf they'd bagged up, so I took a photo and sent it to Mr. Collins with one word: evidence. And when he called immediately asking if they were really selling my possessions, I told him it looked that way and said not to stop them, to just document everything and add it to what they owed me if I ever needed to sue for the stolen money. By day 10, Mom's lawyer dropped the case, and Mr. Collins told me there were no grounds to proceed and that the lawyer advised her against suing me personally because she'd lose and I'd countersue, adding that she genuinely believed the house would eventually be hers and that Grandpa only put it in my name for tax reasons, something she'd never bothered to confirm in 8 years. On day 7, Cousin Mike reached out just to talk and told me he'd looked into the money situation and that it was seriously messed up, saying if it were him, he'd probably do the same thing. Then casually mentioning Ashley asked him for $500 for moving costs, and he'd said no, which almost made me laugh. 3 days before they had to be out, I drove past the house one last time and saw a moving truck in the driveway. 2 guys loading furniture while Mom directed them, and Ashley sat on the front steps staring at her phone. And as I watched the place where I grew up and where Grandpa and I used to sit on the back porch fade into the past, I realized all the taking and disrespect and years of being invisible were gone with it. The day before they had to leave, there was no call or text from Mom, just silence. And whether that meant she finally understood or was simply exhausted, it felt like progress. On day 30, I stayed home, made coffee, and watched the morning light through my window until Diana texted to say the new owners had taken possession and everything went smoothly. And when she asked if I was okay, I told her I was, and I meant it. 3 months later, at happy hour with my coworker Dave, he said I'd changed and seemed colder, and while I thought about how cold had gotten me my apartment, saved me $244,000, and finally set me free, I couldn't say it was a bad thing. 4 months after the sale, I went on my first date since everything happened with a woman named Sarah, met her for coffee, then dinner, then hiking, and when she asked about my family on the 4th date, I told her I didn't really talk to them anymore and gave her the short version about the savings. I told her about the room and the house, and she listened carefully, nodded along, and said all the right supportive things, but then she asked if I missed them, and I surprised even myself by saying no, not at all, because they stole $100,000 from me. She said she understood that, but reminded me they were still my family and asked if I didn't wish things had turned out differently. And I looked at her and told her they were different now because I made them different. She went quiet for a moment and then said she thought what I did was probably the right decision. But the way I talked about it sounded like I was explaining a business deal, not something involving my mom and my sister, and I told her maybe that's because that's how they treated it, like a transaction where I was the ATM and they were the ones withdrawing. She said maybe, but pointed out that I was talking about it the same way now, like I was the bank and they were overdrawn, and I honestly didn't have an answer for that. We went on one more date after that, and it was fine and easy enough, but something had shifted between us, and a week later she texted to say she'd had fun, but felt like we were looking for different things, wishing me luck, and I stared at the message wondering if she was right, and if I'd gotten so cold that even someone new could feel it. 6 months after the sale, Cousin Mike called just to give me an update, telling me my mom had found a job as a receptionist at a dental office, her first real job in about 30 years, which took a second to sink in. And when I asked about Ashley, he said her fresh start only lasted a few months before she burned through whatever money was left, met some guy online, and moved in with him after 2 weeks. He said Mom was alone now in a 2-bedroom apartment, with Ashley claiming she was paying half the rent, but who really knew? And I pictured Mom working a job she probably hated and living alone, and I felt something that wasn't quite guilt, more like a faded echo of it. When I asked Mike why he was telling me all this, he said it was because he thought I should know I made the right call, that everyone had been saying I was cruel, but once he looked into the money and the room and everything else, it was clear what they did was messed up, and hearing that made me realize he was the first person in the family to actually say it out loud. 9 months after the sale, a handwritten letter showed up with Mom's writing on the envelope, and I almost threw it away before curiosity got the better of me. And inside she wrote that she wasn't asking for anything and knew I wouldn't believe that, but needed to say things she should have said years ago, admitting she was wrong about the money and my room and everything, that she told herself she was helping Ashley and that I'd understand because I always landed on my feet, but really she used my strength against me, and made me carry everyone while giving nothing back. She wrote that Grandpa Harold had been right about her, that she finally saw it, and that she wasn't asking for forgiveness, just wanted me to know she understood now, that she was working for the first time in decades and it was hard and humbling, and that she hoped I was well and that someday I could think of her without anger. I read it twice and stared out the window, feeling torn between the part of me that remembered hot chocolate on snow days and learning to ride a bike, and the part that remembered garbage bags, an empty room, and being told I'd earn it back like it meant nothing. And I didn't write back. Not then, and maybe not ever, but I didn't throw the letter away either. A year later, I was in a coffee shop when I saw Ashley at the counter arguing with the barista about the wrong order and wrong size. Same energy as always, designer bag, new hair, clearly someone else funding her life now. And she walked right past me without recognizing me at all, which felt familiar except this time the invisibility was my choice. A year and 3 months after everything, on Grandpa Harold's birthday, I drove to the cemetery for the first time since the funeral and stood in front of his simple headstone with his name, dates, and the words "a man who kept his promises," pulled out his letter, and read the line again about how they'd say family comes first without understanding that I was only family when it was convenient. And I folded it up and told him out loud that he was right, and that I kept my promise, leaving a small stone on the headstone before walking away. Now, when people ask if I regret selling the house or cutting off my family after 26 years, the honest answer is sometimes. Not because the decision was wrong, but because of the cost, the coldness Dave noticed, the date that didn't work out, the way I tense up when someone asks about family, because protecting yourself leaves marks too. The $244,000 is still growing and building towards something, maybe a house one day, maybe a family of my own made up of people who see me for more than what I can provide, and I believe now that those people exist. Mom hasn't reached out since the letter, and sometimes I think about writing back just to acknowledge that she finally saw me, but every time I start I stop, and I'm learning to live with that silence. Sometimes I drive past the old house and see it painted blue with a garden out front and kids' toys in the yard, and I don't feel sad so much as grateful that Grandpa gave me a way out, sad that I needed one, and hopeful that whatever I build next won't need walls to protect me, because the house did its job one last time, and now I'm figuring out how to protect myself without becoming someone I don't recognize.